Hey everyone, today I want to go over one of the first things we see when learning Java, but don't really fully understand for quite a while. So when you first start taking a Java course, either if it's with an instructor or watching a video or reading an online guide, one of the first things they have us do is print out something to the console. Often this ends up being hello world or some derivative of this. And this is really cool, actually. If it's your first time programming, actually interacting with the computer and getting it to show something in just pretty much one line is really nice. It can get you hooked and it leads in well to everything else. And that will often look like for a lot of these courses is they have used an IDE such as IntelliJ, NetBeans, Eclipse, create a project, create a class file, and it'll often generate a main method for you. If not, they just tell you exactly what to write, not explaining it or have you copy paste it. Then they tell you, okay, write this system dot out dot print line parentheses double quotes hello world um, close double quotes, closing parentheses, semicolon, and then you can run it. And boom, to the console, we see hello world printed out, which is really cool. But then, for some people that have been following around listening, maybe they're like, wait, what is all that other stuff? Especially public static void main string, square brackets, args, square bracket, what is all that? And this is a great question. And a lot of people ask this, and what I've noticed is a lot of times, instructors will say, "Oh, we'll come back to that in the future," or hold on, we'll get to it, and it will start to make sense over time. And actually, that's not a horrible answer. I think explaining that, oh, it's the entry point to our program. It's like where, when you start the program, this is where the code will start running first. That makes sense, but you don't want to go start explaining what all these words are to the students yet because they're just not going to understand. There's too many concepts and not enough, corresponding knowledge yet. It just won't make sense. It's just going to cause more confusion. So it makes sense to come back to it later. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm coming back to it, and I'm going to, at a relatively high level, come back to it and explain the structure of this main method, this entry point to our Java program. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. Basically, as I said, the main method is the entry point to our program. It's what the Java runtime finds our method, calls it, and starts the execution of our program. First calling this piece of line, or whatever line you have here. In my case, it's not out.println hello world. And that makes and that allows us to make good sense of this first keyword here, public. This makes sense. This is, an access modifier. There's different access modifiers. You could not have one. Public's a choice, private's a choice, protected. But the only one that's going to work is public. And you can see that even when I put protected here, the green run button's gone. Nothing, gone. Private, gone. And so the only word that works is public. And this makes sense because we have to expose to the program that this main method is here. This main method exists because Java runtime has to find our method and run it. And if it's not public, how is it supposed to find it? If it's private, how is it supposed to find it? Yes, Java runtime could do whatever it wants, but to follow the rules of Java, this is what it has to do. It has to be a public method that can be accessed from the outer world, or else how are we going to ever start our program? How are we going to access it by running Java, right? Or else we won't be able to start it. If it's private, it's only our class can access it, right? How could anyone else access it? How could someone call our main? So that doesn't make sense. So it has to be public. And as you see, once I got rid of it, I was not able to run it. And if I try to run it here, it's actually going to say like, oh, main method not found in my class. Please define the main method. And it tells me that exact format. This is just the comment. This is the format that's required. Those other words won't work. So that makes sense. Access modifier, we use them a lot to kind of control access, keep things private when they need to be. But in this case, it needs to be public. The default is like kind of like package protected thing. So yeah, that one doesn't work either. So the next keyword, static. This is possibly the hardest keyword to understand here because it's quite complicated. To fully understand it, you need to understand objects. You know, you first start learning Java, you just work with like arithmetic, variables, methods, but then eventually we get to objects, which are pretty much just like instantiation of a class definition that contains information, allows you to interact and manipulate it. For example, here I have a dog. This is a dog class, and it has one instance field. The instance field is for one dog, like one instance of a dog, okay? We have a constructor to construct that instance, and we have an instance method to get the name of that dog. And what this looks like, in our main method, we can use this in a variable declaration. We're creating an object of type dog, storing in a variable called dog, and we're creating a new one. And we have a constructor that accepts name, so we have to specify name. I'll just say Callie as our dog's name. And now we've constructed a new dog object. And we can go ahead and do a lot of things here. So for example, we can go and print out its name, and we should see Callie. This is calling this instance method. So this dog's get name method and getting its instance name. So that instance of dog's name, which we specify here in the constructor, this.name equals name. So this.name equals Callie, and we access it with this instance method. That's cool. That's only for that dog. If we create another dog, its name wouldn't, such as like, oh, dog 2, new dog, like, hello, bad dog name. But if I try to do its get name, I would not get Callie. It would print out hello because they have separate names. Those are instance fields, right? But notice I have some other fields here, but this one's static called dog count. And here we have a static method called get dog count. So what are these? Does each dog here have its own dog count? That doesn't really make sense, right? Like each dog has to keep track of how many dogs there are total. That's quite complicated. Why don't we just keep track of it once? And that's what a static is. It's it's tying some information to the class rather than one instance object of that class. So it's tied to dog. So that's why to access it, to access static information or static methods, we don't use like an object of type dog. We directly use the class name and then dot. In this case, I can access a static method, get dog count, because that's public. And here it should print out 0 because we have no dogs. But in our constructor for dog, we go ahead and increment dog count. So if I do go ahead and make that dog, we should see now, hey, dog.get dog count. And this is using that static method. We're not using this individual dog object. No, we're using the shared thing. And if we make another one, dog2, our dog named hello, we'll see that this is going to be 2. It's not going to be 1 because we're using this shared, this static dog count that's tied to the class of dog rather than one individual object. So why main is this? Well, it makes sense. There is no object yet when our program started, right? There is just this class. And really, it wouldn't really make sense for a bunch of objects to each have their own method because there should only be one entry point into our program, right? We shouldn't want to be entering into our program from multiple points multiple times. That doesn't really make sense. There's only one. And in the case where there's only one thing, it makes sense for it to be static. We want to, the Java runtime wants to use this class, access its static method of main without having to instantiate an object. Like there's no reason to instantiate an object. Like main isn't a thing that needs to, store information. I mean, you could put your main method, for example, in dog and call, and it would work. Like I could go ahead and put a main method in a class called dog and use it as an object, which is fine, but people often separate it. But it will still be called statically because it's not necessary to be on object. There should only be one main method, not multiple main methods. Next is void. This is our return type. All methods need a return type. We see here string. We see here int. And this is basically saying what this method returns. But void isn't really a thing, right? Well, yeah, see, we don't have a return statement. It's really a lack of returning thing. So like if I try to return like 10, it's gonna give me an error and it's gonna be like, oh, cannot return a value from a method with a void result type. Because void is saying we're not returning anything. And we can use other types to specify that we want to return those things, such as return this.name, which is a string. It'll return a string. But the main method doesn't have anything to return. Like the only thing calling this program is like the console and what is it going to do with what it's returning. Like there are things it could do. For example, we see here process finished with exit code 0. Other programming languages such as C actually give their main method a return type of int, so you can return an int and like processes can tell, like say a process calls a dollar process, you can see like, oh, did it actually work properly or did it exit with an error? That's true of those languages, and it can be good for like communicating those problems. And we still have that. If you really need to, you can use this method called system.exit and change our exit status. And you'll see here process finished with exit code 1, or I could do like some huge number and it will change our exit code. But for the case of Java, generally in our use case, there isn't too many cases where you need to change that status, and we'll communicate problems in other fashions. So we have a return type of void, and our program does not have to return an integer or anything here. We just return nothing. That's what that is. So yeah, the return type. Next is main. What is this? This is the name of our method. We see here get name, get dog count. That's basically what it is. We can't call it something else. If I try calling it main hello, we're going to see that run button's gone. That's just because Java looks for the main method. If I try running, it'll just give that same message again. It can't find main method. It's just because of what it looks for. It's a predefined thing. They could have chose something else, but main makes sense, and it's what people have done in the past. So yeah. Next is our method arguments, or our method parameters, right? And in this case, we have one parameter, string, square brackets, args. What is this? This is an array of strings. So this is what the type definition of an array looks like, where you specify the type, then the square brackets, and then you give it this parameter a name. In this case, args. Actually, you could give this a different name. This is like one thing that can change about the main method and it will still work. It's just kind of been a standard to call this args. And another thing is you can use this var arg format, because actually where this is like a variable amount of args, but this is pretty much the same thing as an array. We could even just treat it as such. It can only be used as like your last parameter in a method, but in this case, it's our only parameter, so it's fine to use it. But generally, the format is to use these square brackets. That's what it looks like. Another change you can make is making this parameter final. I tend to do this just so you don't reassign it, just in case, but you don't have to. It just kind of affords you that extra safety. Of course, then we close our list of parameters. You could, like in other methods, you could go ahead and specify other parameters, but as you see, in this case, it doesn't work. We only have our string args parameter. Next, our squiggly bracket. So what is this squiggly bracket? This is defining the scope of our function, right? This is like, oh, when you call this, everything within these two squiggly brackets is what's going to be called. And say we define, variables in here, it will stay within this scope. It won't be accessible outside of this scope. So kind of gives structure to that code running here. For example, I could do like string message equals hello YouTube, and then use that here in this kind of procedural or code, like one thing, then the next thing, and see that working. It's all scoped within these squiggly brackets. And, that's it. That's kind of the structure of our main method. As a recap, we have our access modifier, we have the static keyword, which defines it as being tied to the class rather than an individual uh, instantiated object, void, which is our return type that actually indicates that there is nothing to return. Then we have our name, main, it's just this predefined name for that entry point, our list of parameters, and in this case, we only have one, and that's an array of strings. Then we have a squiggly bracket. So that's the structure. Um, More specifically, what are these args though? Like often we kind of just pass by these and don't use them. But if you think about it, if you interact with programs like in your terminal, you often give parameters. For example, the change directory command, cd, and then you give, well, like, oh, what directory to change into. And that's an argument. In basic programs, we tend not to use it, and you can try printing this out, but you'll see it'll just print out the object reference, which isn't so useful at first, because this is just an array of strings, which is an object, and you can try using something like, oh, arrays.toString if you want to print them out. In this case, I haven't passed in any args. Depending on the IDE, there's different ways to pass in args. If you're running in command line, you would compile the program with Java C, and then when you run it with Java, you'd just write, your class file, and then you would put your arguments there. In the case of IntelliJ, like I'm using, I can edit configurations, and I can add program arguments. So I can add hi YouTube, and these are two separate arguments. So this array would now have a length of 2 because I have an item at the 0th position, I have an item at the 1st position. And now when we run it, we should see these printed out here because we're using it. And great, look at that. We see this array printed out. This is just one way to just quickly print it out, but there's a lot you can do with this. You can configure program behavior. So like, for example, you could be like, oh, if args.length is less than 2, you could go ahead, be like, oh, you must specify at least 2 arguments. And return. And this is like a way to, sanitize input and be like, oh, you're missing behavior. Or you could be more specific about it and say like what what the arguments actually need to be. But I'm gonna just, not worry about that right now. And then once you actually verified how many arguments there are, I can go ahead, I can access them. So I could say like, oh, string arg1 equal arg0. And then I could go ahead, print this one out. And we should see it prints out just hi, because that was our argument at the 0th position. We could do fancy things like if arg1 dot equals hi. We could print out something like welcome to this program. Else, we could print out why didn't you say hi to me? And we can kind of configure program behavior based off of that. So there's a lot we can do with these arguments. It's just in Java, a lot of what we learn is like getting input after the program started, but there are cases where, we want to configure behavior of the program beforehand. Even Java itself can be configured, when you're launching a file to change like what garbage collector you're using and things like that. So there's definitely things that are good to be done beforehand, and that can be done with the arguments. Otherwise, you can just ignore it if you want to. But yeah, that's the structure of the main method at a pretty high level, and what each piece of it means, why it is the way it is. If you have any questions, you can let me know in the comments or ask in my Discord, and I'll try to help you. If not, I'll try to learn with you, and yeah, we can go from there. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you guys next time.